where how far did we get?
We stopped at chapter 5 of book 2.
Okay, that's why I've got that there. I didn't think we'd gotten that far. That's right. We left off with Faramir talking with Frodo and Sam. So they get captured by Faramir and his men. In chapter 5, the window on the west, Frodo and Sam are talking with Faramir, and the first page of that chapter, Faramir says, if you are the halfling that was named, doubtless you brought this thing, whatever it was, to the council, of which you speak, and there Boromir saw it. Do you deny it? Frodo, no. Okay? But Frodo doesn't answer. So Faramir goes on and says, you got to tell me more. He says, do you keep this thing hidden? Is that because you choose to keep it hidden? Frodo, not because I choose. It does not belong to me. It does not belong to any mortal. Okay? They keep talking. Frodo mentions Aragorn was going to Minas Tirith, and Boromir accepted Aragorn's claim as being the heir of Isildur and all that. So Faramir realizes you're talking about stuff that shouldn't necessarily be heard by everybody. So he says, we'll talk about this a little bit later. In pages 668 and 69 is where I want to pick up with briefly. Frodo says, top of 668, to Faramir. After Faramir says, and did you know Boromir died? His horn, he says, we found. And Frodo says, no, I did not know of it. And now your tale fills me with dread. For if Boromir was in peril and was slain, I must fear that all my companions perish too. Why make that assumption?
Boromir was kind of a badass, so if he gets killed, and that's didn't fare very well for
Yeah, Boromir's a massive warrior. He's used to getting out of skirmishes. If he's dead, they're all dead. So he says, Frodo, will you not put aside your doubt of me and let me go? I am weary, full of grief, and afraid. I've got something to do, or attempt to do, before I am slain. Go back, Faramir, captain of Gondor, defend your city while you may. And what? And let me go where my doom takes me. What's he mean on 668 by defend your city while you may? What's going on in Frodo's mind? Okay, yeah, I mean, he's assuming there's going to be a battle there. What else, though? Yeah. He thinks it's a lost cause. While you, he doesn't go back, he doesn't say, go back to your city and defend it till you win. It's while you defend, while you may. That while you may indicates you can't forever. And then notice how he finishes it. And let me go where my doom takes me. How is he using the word doom? Is he using it the way the riddle did, that doom is near at hand? No. He's using it the way Boromir interpreted it. The end. Loss. Failure. Okay? He says, or Faramir says, for me there is no comfort in our speech together, but you surely draw from it more dread than need be. In other words, Frodo, you're assuming they've all died. Unless the people of Lorien themselves came to him, who arrayed Boromir's for a funeral? What's Faramir doing there? If you've ever read any Sherlock Holmes, it's logic. In other words, they can't all be dead, Frodo. Somebody put Boromir in a boat and surrounded him with the weapons of all those he slew. Somebody put the broken horn in his lap. Orcs don't do that. In fact, to be gross, if the orcs had won, they probably would have eaten Boromir. Okay? So he says, at least some of your company live, Frodo. He goes on and says, I've got to decide what to do with you. Okay? So they go on and they make their way towards what is called the window on the west, that little cave. And on 669, Faramir says, I broke off my speech with you, not only because time pressed, but because we had a lot of men around me. He says, but now I'd like to talk about Isildur's bane. You were not totally or completely frank with me, Frodo. I told no lies and told all the truth I could. He says, no, I understand. He says, I would hazard Isildur's bane. There's a bit of a problem between you, that is, you and Boromir. Clearly, it's a mighty heirloom. Am I close? Am I getting warm? Frodo, close. There was no contention in our company. Okay? So Faramir understands what Frodo is hinting at, because Frodo doesn't want to just jump right out and say, your brother was an idiot. He tried to take this thing from me. He says, okay, so your trouble was with Boromir alone. He wished this thing brought to Minas Tirith. Alas, it is a crooked fate. This is the bottom of page 669. It is a crooked fate that seals your lips who saw him last. He says, he died well. I know that. His face was more beautiful even than in life. Why? How did Boromir die? Not just killing orcs. That was before he died. With hope? He repented, and we're told he dies with what on his face? A smile. You wouldn't think somebody who's got 20 arrows sticking out of him dying with a smile. You'd think he'd die with a rictus of pain. Okay? He says, but I pressed you hard about Isildur's bane. Forgive me. They keep talking. Faramir talks about their childhood together and such. He mentions the Grey Pilgrim. And Frodo says, does he have a name? Mithrandir, Faramir says. But then he says that he also said this. He, the Grey Pilgrim. Mithrandir among the elves is what I'm called. Tharkun to the dwarves. Olorin I was in my youth in the west that is forgotten. That's Valinor. Okay. In the south, I'm called Incanus. In the north, Gandalf. In other words, what are we learning a little bit here about Gandalf? Louder?
Pretty old enough to have many names.
Okay, he's pretty old, so he has many names. More about the many names. He's known by different names according to different areas of Middle Earth. Sound like anybody in our popular mythology?
Jesus.
Is Jesus known by other names? By other cultures? Is Jesus known by something else in Europe or in Russia or in India or in South America? No, it's pretty much Jesus, or maybe Jesus. But it's still the same, okay? How about Sinterklaas? Santa Claus. I'm not saying Tolkien's paralleling Gandalf on Santa Claus. I'm just saying, giving this as an example. He's known by other names in other places. Okay? Frodo, Gandalf. In other words, I recognize that last one. All the others, clueless. He's never heard Gandalf called Mithrandir. He didn't hear him apparently called that in Rivendell. Okay? So Frodo says, oh, by the way, he's dead. So Faramir's like, man, you guys just have bad luck wherever you go, he implies. Okay? So, bottom of 671. He's been talking about Gandalf's coming to Minas Tirith, reading in the library, etc., really kind of not getting along all that great with Denethor. And he says, what in truth this thing is, this Isildur's Bane that Gandalf researched, I cannot yet guess. But some heirloom of power, and peril it must be. A fell weapon, perchance, devised by the Dark Lord. If it were a thing that gave advantage in battle, I can well believe that Boromir the proud and fearless, often rash, ever anxious for the victory of Minas Tirith, notice the parentheses, what would he receive as a result of his victory for Minas Tirith? Glory. Okay? Tolkien's writing from the perspective, writing this part, from the perspective of an Anglo-Saxon warrior. Greatest thing you could get is glory, especially before the coming of Christianity to Anglo-Saxon England. That's such a thing that he might desire such a thing and be allured by it. But look at the second to the last paragraph. Second to the last full paragraph of that page. But fear no more. In other words, put away your fear, Frodo. You don't have to worry about me. Why? I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. In other words, if this is the ring and he's walking by, he wouldn't pick it up. He'd just walk on by. There's nothing, Faramir says, that would cause him to pick it up. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her. So, what does the so mean? Everything that comes after. Using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. I mean, think about that. Put it in our world terms. If Secretary Mattis found a weapon that could ensure the United States went on, yet the weapon was inherently evil, Faramir is saying, I wouldn't use it. No matter what. Why? I do not wish for such triumphs, Frodo, son of Drogo. Because it would be what kind of triumph? What are we still debating even today? 72 years after the fact. Was it right to use the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That debate still goes on, just as it did with Truman and his counselors and advisors. Should we do it? Should we not do it? Okay? Frodo, neither did the council. That is, the council said, we can't use it. Frodo, nor do I. Faramir, here's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see the White Tower, I'd like to see the white tree and flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown in return, and Minas Tirith in peace. What's so big about the white tree and flower?
It flowers my king.
See, at the innermost circle of Minas Tirith is a city of rising terraces. The seventh circle is down here. The top innermost circle is where the Hall of Denethor is. And there's a courtyard there, and there's a withered, old, dead tree still sitting there. It's been dead for how long? Over 2,000 years. He says, I want to see that tree flowering. Why? What does that symbolize? Not only that there's a king, but that after that king, there will be another king. And after that king, there will be another king. That's why he says, and the silver crown return. In other words, I don't really care about being steward. Minas Anor again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens. not a mistress of many slaves. What is Menace Anor? What in the world is he talking about?
Isn't it like the Tower of the Moon?
Yes. Menace Anor equals, is it AS or IS? It's AS. Sorry. Equals Menace Morgul, which we're going to come to at the no, it's not the beginning of the next book. The second half of the Return of the King. Tolkien's really cruel that way. Okay? So he says to Frodo, fear not. I don't ask you to tell me anymore. I don't even ask you to tell me if I'm close. So they go on and they get blindfolded so they could go off to the cave. 674, Faramir tells them what it's called. And they ask about the other companion again. 676, we get our only, what people have described as real kind of religious ritual. And even there it's not religious, because what are they doing?
They're just staring at the sun.
Yeah, they stand and they face west in silence. Okay? But kind of, he says, you don't do anything like this at home, Frodo? Oh, we just, dig in. I'm going to skip a bunch. Page 680 and following. They're telling Faramir about their journey so far. They talk about Galadriel and Lothlorien. And he says, man, I would love to see her. Because Galadriel kind of is what in Faramir's mind? Think what Éomer thinks. But not sorceress. A myth. A fairy tale. Kind of like Guinevere. Okay? He says, I envy you that have spoken with the White Lady. Sam goes on and says, man, you ought to see her. Faramir says, then she must be perilously fair. Sam, I don't know about perilous. Strikes me, folk takes their peril with them into Lorien and finds it there because they brought it. But perhaps you could call her perilous because she's so strong in herself, that is, she knows who she is. You could dash yourself to pieces on her like a ship on a rock. Now, Sorry, don't mean to speak ill of the dead. Now, Boromir, you say? Faramir says. He took his peril with him. Remember what Aragorn said to Boromir when they left the treehouse and went back to their own little place where they were sleeping? Boromir says he doesn't quite trust this woman, and Aragorn reprimands him. Do not speak ill of the Lady Galadriel. He says there is nothing ill in Lorien but what? But what you bring with you. Okay? So, Sam's on a roll. Faramir, yes. Now, Boromir, you would say. What would you say? He took his peril with him? Yes, sir, begging your pardon. A fine man as your brother was, if I may say so. But you've been warm on the sea all along. Now, I watched Boromir and listened to him from Rivendell all down the road, looking after my master, as you'll understand, and not meaning any harm to Boromir, like he could harm Boromir. And it's my opinion that in Lorien he first saw clearly what I guessed sooner, what he wanted. From the moment he first saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. So, it's there on the Ingray, And then he turns to Faramir and says, you've spoken very handsome all along. You put me off my guard, talking of elves and all. But handsome is as handsome does. Now's a chance to show your quality. That is, to show your innards. Are you all talk? Or do you really do what you say you would do? And Faramir says, oh, now I understand. The ring, the one ring, the ring of power, the ring of rings. He stood up very tall and stern, his gray eyes shining. Frodo and Sam sprang from their stools, set themselves side by side, backs to the wall, trying to pull their swords out. Alas for Boromir, Faramir says. It was too sore a trial. He says, you're less judges of men than I am of halflings. We're truth speakers, we men of Gondor. Yeah, but what experience do they have with men of Gondor? Boromir, he tried to take the ring. We boast seldom and then perform or die in the attempt. Remember that poem I mentioned the other day, the old English poem, The Wanderer? One of the things said in The Wanderer is never make a boast until or unless you know which way your mind will go when the rubber meets the road. That is, when the time for boasting really is at hand. You have to confront an enormous enemy. Or as it's kind of described in Beowulf, you've got to confront a Grendel. So what's he say? Not if I found it on the highway would I take this thing. Compare that with the film, if you've seen it. What happens in the film? Pretty much at this point, okay, he doesn't physically try to take it from Frodo. What does he do? He takes Frodo and Sam on his way to his father. He takes them to the town of Osgiliath. Here, even if I were such a man as to desire this thing, and even though I knew not clearly what this thing was when I spoke, still I would take those words as a vow. That is, even if I had no clue, and then I discovered, I swore. I'm held by that oath. He says, don't worry, Sam. It's okay. Chapter 6, the Forbidden Pool. They see Gollum down there fishing in this pool, which Faramir says, capital offense. Poor Gollum, he's just hungry. Frodo tricks Gollum. They capture him. How does Faramir, quote unquote, prove or test Gollum? What does he do? Put him on the rack? Stick his hands in fire? Bamboo shoots up the fingernails? He looks in his eyes. Where else have we seen that? Gandalf? Does Gandalf look in your eyes to determine whether you're telling the truth? Nope.
So at the council there was a glint.
Well, we see that glint in Boromir's eyes, but nobody's piercing into his eyes. We see it one other spot. Galadriel in Lothlorien. Everybody comes up to her flat, they talk for a while, and then she examines them. That's what makes Boromir uneasy. Okay? Everybody else, is pretty much fine with it. Pretty much, there's, little concern. So he looks into Sam's eyes, and he says, I wouldn't trust him. I don't see any evil right now, but I wouldn't trust him. So they ask Gollum, where are you taking them? And he eventually says, to Minas Morgul. Okay? But they've got to go to the crossroads. So, they go off to the crossroads. And the crossroads are leading, this is west, goes off ultimately to the sea. This is east, goes off ultimately into Mordor. North goes off ultimately to Gondor and further places north. And this goes off in south into what's called Far Harad. Okay? They get to the crossroads. Page 702. The sun is setting. All right? It's overcast, but it's not natural overcast. That is, it's not just cloudy. This is an overcast, a shadow, if you want, that is coming out of Mordor. The sun sets, and its rays shine essentially down the road. Page 702. Standing there for a moment, filled with dread, Frodo became aware that a light was shining. He saw it glowing on Sam's face beside him. Turning towards it, he saw, beyond an arch of boughs, the road to Osgiliath running almost as straight as a stretched ribbon down into the west. There, far away, beyond sad Gondor, now overwhelmed in shade, the sun was sinking. Sorry, Gondor's not this way, it's this way. Because they're pretty far south. Sun was sinking, finding at last the hem of the great, slow-rolling pall of cloud. And what happens? The brief glow fell upon a huge sitting figure. Right here, there's a statue. Sorry. The head's been lopped off. Still and solemn as the great stone kings of Argonath. The years had gnawed it, violent hands had maimed it, its head was gone, and in its place was set in mockery a round, rough-hewn stone, rudely painted by savage hands, in the likeness of a grinning face with one large red eye. Okay? And it's got, all kinds of foul graffiti written all over it. Like, Sauron does your mother and, other stuff. Suddenly, caught by the level beams, Frodo saw the old king's head. It was lying, rolled away by the roadside. And he says, "Look, Sam, the king has got a crown again, because the sun's beams shine right on the forehead, essentially, of that stone head, and on that forehead has grown around it an ivy, a vine that has flowers, and the sun is now shining right on those flowers." Suddenly caught by the level beams, Frodo sees this. The eyes were hollow and the carven beard was broken, but about the high stern forehead there was a coronal of silver and gold. Frodo sees this, and what does he say? They cannot conquer forever. This is a little example of a eucatastrophe. Can you really count on that happening again? I mean, for the sun to be just in the right place, for there not to be any cloud, for the trees not to be drooping enough to block the ray. But more importantly, it's a eucatastrophe in the sense that Tolkien means it in that essay, where it's not only a sudden miraculous grace never to be recounted to occur again, but it also gives a glimpse of joy. Tolkien says about that eucatastrophe idea, he says it does not discount discatastrophe. Right? Discatastrophe is what we think of when we normally think of the word just plain old catastrophe. What's a discatastrophe? Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma. All right? It's a horrible, rotten, bad thing. So, if it doesn't discount this, what does it say? Tolkien says the eucatastrophe says, yeah, even though things look pretty bad right now, and even though we might fail this battle, might lose this battle, ultimately there is victory. December 8th, 1941. What kind of mindset was the United States in? September 12th, 2001. We were on our knees both times. In other words, we've taken a big hit. Right? But we didn't say on December 8th or September 12th, Uncle, we give. We're sorry. We'll never do anything against anybody else ever again. What it says is that the person facing imminent destruction thinks, I'm going to go ahead and fight. I might die, but others might win later. It's kind of the mindset that, use another example from what is today popular culture, but is actual history. Another example is, what those sailors and fishers, men with little rowboats and fishing boats on the coast of England did in the spring of 1940 when they rescued their compatriots from Dunkirk, France. Things were looking pretty bad. You had the whole German army just getting ready to march in and obliterate those 300,000 plus troops and civilians. They cannot conquer forever, says Frodo. And then what happens? To prove they can conquer temporarily, the sun sets, and the golden crown, gone. Chapter 8, the Stairs of Cirith Ungol. So, they start going up this secret path, which Gollum has said twice now is guarded. When they're outside the Black Gate, he tells them there is another way. Frodo, is it guarded? Well, yes, it's guarded. Of course it's guarded. You think Sauron's stupid and doesn't have every entrance into his domain guarded? Okay. So they make their way up, and it's long, long, long stairs. Page 711. They take a break. And he and Frodo are steering a ship of water. And Sam's like, I wish we could fill up our water bottles again. Frodo says there isn't any water flowing out of Imlad Morgul, not that we could drink. And Sam says, I wouldn't trust it, not till I was dying of thirst. There's a wicked feeling about this place, and a smell I fancy. He doesn't mean I like the smell. He means it seems like there's a smell. Do you notice it? Excuse me. A queer kind of smell, stuffy. I don't like it. Frodo, I don't like anything here, Sam. Step or stone, breath or bone. Earth, air, and water all seem accursed. But so our path is laid. Now back at the beginning of the chapter about the dead marshes, Frodo asks Gollum, Smeagol, how do we shape our path? Notice the difference? How do we shape our path versus this is how our path is laid? The second one implies what? Or the first one implies what that the second one doesn't?
There really is no way to get across. You should figure it out.
Kind of. Lauderdale? Now they have no choice. How do we shape our path means we get to choose. My path is laid means I can't go off. It's like I'm on an electric metro system, a tube system. You can't go off the rails because you stop going. There's no electricity that keeps you moving. Frodo's saying, this is destiny, fate. I must do this. Could Frodo turn around at this point? He could. He has that choice. Could he have stopped at the window on the west and said, this is kind of nice here. You guys are friendly. You've got good food, a beautiful view. I'll stay here. He could. But what wouldn't happen? The quest wouldn't be achieved. Sauron would get the ring. Sam, yes, that's so. You're right, Mr. Frodo. And then Sam kind of turns into literary critic. And we shouldn't be here at all if we'd known more about it before we started. Before we started, when? Way back in the Shire? Why does Sam go on this journey? Yay! I can see elves and all. Oh, and march into Satan's backyard. Was Sam thinking about all the dangers and troubles and possibilities when he said, yes, I'll go? No, he wasn't thinking about that at all. What was he thinking? Adventure. Like the one, what is it, the Army? Or is it the Navy? Be all you can be. Oh, yeah, by the way, if there's a war, you have to serve. It's not just getting your education paid for. There are little strings attached to that kind of decision. But I suppose it's often that way. The brave things in the old tales and songs, Mr. Frodo, adventures, as I used to call them. Sam's saying, I'm not going to call these things adventures anymore. I used to think that they were things the wonderful folk of the stories went out and looked for. So what kind of stories? We don't know about Hobbit stories, so use stories from our world. The Arthurian legends, the Beowulf story, the Viking sagas, the Iliad, the Odyssey. He's saying, do you really think Mr. Odysseus, when he set off to fight the Trojans to get Helen back for his brother, for Menelaus? Yes. No, not his brother, Agamemnon's brother. Do you really think he set off to do that thinking everything's going to work fine? He says, I used to think the heroes of these stories went out looking for heroic deeds to do. Why? Because they wanted them. Because they were exciting. And life was a bit dull. A kind of a sport, you might say. Going off and fighting the Trojan War is like a pickup game of basketball, in other words. It just lasts 10 years, and all your men die on the way home. That's not the way of it, he says, with the tales that really mattered, or the ones that stay in the mind. Folks seem to have been just landed in them usually. Their paths were laid that way, as you put it. What does he mean? He means in the great tales, the great stories, why do the people that we now know of as heroes become heroes? Because they're reacting to situations beyond their control. They just find themselves in those situations. They don't necessarily go out looking for them. Did Samson from the Old Testament go out looking necessarily to fight all the Philistines, to destroy the temple of Dagon? No. He finds himself in that situation because he marries a Philistine, first of all. Okay? But I expect they had lots of chances like us of turning back. Only they didn't. In other words, the reason we have heroes like Beowulf, or like Arthur, or like Gawain, or let's use some real ones, like Washington, like Eisenhower. What? They don't turn back when the going gets tough. You know, Washington at Valley Forge. His men are dying. It's freezing cold. They don't even have proper clothing for that winter. Do they stop? No. They fight on. He says, and if they did turn back, what? We shouldn't know because they'd have been forgotten. If the colonists lost the Revolutionary War and we were all still English, would we even celebrate, quote unquote, President's Day? No, because there wouldn't be a President's Day. Would we even talk about Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, Hancock, all those guys? No, we wouldn't. We hear about those as just went on, and not all to a good end, mind you. Like whom? Lincoln? What kind of good end did he have? A bullet in the brain. Beowulf? What kind of good end did he have? Killed by a dragon. Okay, he killed the dragon too. Arthur? What kind of good end did he have? Killed by his son. At least not to what folk inside a story and not outside it call a good end. That is, if you're living the story, yeah, it may not be a good end. If we're outside reading the story, it might be a good end. This is Tolkien's idea of the happy ending. Sam goes on, you know, Here's what he means by a good end. Coming home, finding things all right, though not quite the same, like old Mr. Bilbo. Or jump to the end of the Lord of the Rings. The very end. Sam coming home after he sees Frodo off to Valinor with the other ring bearers that are still alive. Gandalf, for example. Bilbo. Gandalf, one ring. Bilbo. And what does Sam get? As he rides up, forget the name of the little lane he's on, and arrives at his home. Number 4 Bag End. What does he see? There's a glowing light in the window. And there's his wife, Rosie Cotton Gamgee, standing at the door with the door wide open. She welcomes him in. She puts him in his easy chair. She puts his little daughter on his lap. And that's it. His very last words are something like, I'm back. Back to what? Back to coming home, finding things all right, though not quite the same. How's it not quite the same? You'll never see Frodo again. He says those aren't always the best tales to hear, but they might be the best ones to get landed in, right? Better to end up in that story than in the story of Flight 93 out of Boston on September 11th. How did that story end? Todd Beamer and a handful of other guys, last words, let's roll. In other words, we think this plane is going to try to take out the U.S. Capitol. Not on our watch. Are they military? No. Some are ex-military. But what are they saying? Go back to the end of the Council of Elrond. Or use the film's trite version. Even little people can arise to confound the plans of the quote-unquote great. Little people. Ordinary, common, everyday businessmen. Brought that plane down so that the Capitol or the White House weren't destroyed. Sam, I wonder what sort of tale we've fallen into. Notice, where are they in the midst of this tale? They're still in the middle of it. Does Sam know how it's going to end? Nope. He thinks he does. Frodo, I wonder, but I don't know. That's the way of a real tale, Sam. Take anyone that you're fond of. You may know or guess what kind of tale it is, happy ending or sad ending. But the people in it, they have no idea. We read stories about the heroism that we witnessed on 9/11. And we've gone beyond that because we've lived past it. But the people who were in the midst of 9/11, they had no idea how it was going to play out. Whether they're people on the planes, people working at the Pentagon, people working in the two towers or rushing to the two towers, or people in the administration. Bush had no idea what the next 24 hours were going to bring. What did we think 2 hours after the attack was going to happen? More. I remember going for a walk that day. I walked that morning before it, and then later in the afternoon, I went for a walk and saw the most amazing sight I'd ever seen. A sky without contrails. And saw that for 4 days. There were no flights over the United States other than military. Okay? We still didn't know how that tale was going to play out. And we don't know today, 16 years later, do we? Because we're still in the midst of the story. The story hasn't finished. Sam. No, sir, of course you don't. That is, you don't want the people in the story to know. You don't want Beowulf to know. Oh, by the way, Beowulf, you're going to die fighting this dragon. You don't want Arthur to know. By the way, Arthur, your son is going to kill you. Beren now. He never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown. And yet he did. That was a worse situation than we're in. But that's a long tale, of course, and goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. And the Silmaril went on and came to Arendelle. And then what does Sam suddenly realize? Hot damn, we are in the same story. You've got some of the light of that Silmaril in that star glass the lady gave you. What? Don't the great tales never end? Sam, no, they never end as tales, but the people in them do what? Come and go. Why does Frodo say that? The people in them come and go when their part's ended. And our part will end later or sooner. What's Frodo thinking? We don't have much stage time left in this story, Sam. Pretty soon, we get to the part Sam and Frodo exit. Sam. And then we can have some rest and some sleep. Notice, we don't end that conversation with Frodo's later, or sooner. Because that's a downer. Frodo's being pessimistic. Okay? So, they keep talking, and Sam wonder where Gollum is, and wonder what part he plays. And I wonder, does he think he's a hero or villain? Okay? They fall asleep. Sam tells Frodo, I'll take watch. Frodo puts his head down. He's got his head in Sam's lap. Sam's leaning up against the rock. Sam falls asleep. And we get Gollum coming back, bottom of 714. This is a key moment in the entire novel. What does Gollum see when he comes back? And what goes on in Gollum's mind? Gollum returns. Peace was in both their faces. A strange expression passed over his lean, hungry face. The gleam faded from his eyes. And what? And they went dim and gray, old and tired. A spasm of pain seemed to twist him. He literally kind of twitches. And what does he do? He turned away, peers back up towards the pass, shaking his head. Now, what does shaking your head almost, not quite, almost universally mean? No, negation, bad, as if engaged in some interior debate. Then he comes back and he slowly puts out a trembling hand, cautiously touching Frodo's knees. Why does he touch Frodo's knees? Louder? To see if he's awake? No. You have to know something about classical literature, or, take that back. You have to know something about a very particular cultural moray from the ancient world up through the early Middle Ages. And this applies to Greco-Roman culture. It applies to Judeo-Christian culture. Touching somebody's knees is an act of supplication, seeking, it's supposed to be an M, mercy. We're going to finish the Odyssey in my one class today. Repeatedly in the Odyssey, somebody will go up to another person's knees and clasp their hands around them, put their hand on their knees, and they are seeking mercy from that individual. In the Old Testament, it's what people do when they seek a blessing from the person whose knees are being clasped. He doesn't clasp his knees, he just reaches out and touches them. And for a fleeting moment, now the narrator takes us outside Gollum's mind, outside Frodo and Sam's, and says, and this is how you are supposed to see this tableau, this beautiful little scene. Could one of the sleepers have seen him, they would have thought that they beheld an old, weary hobbit, shrunken by the years that had carried him far beyond his time, beyond friends and kin, and the fields and streams of youth, an old, starved, pitiable thing. What else is Gollum doing, other than these, possibly, by reaching out and touching Frodo this way? Notice, you now have all three hobbits in contact. What else is Gollum doing? Possibly. We're going to get to that in just a moment. He's connecting. This is now three hobbits. It's not two hobbits and a Gollum thing. This is Gollum's showing we're related. Okay? But what happens? He touches Frodo. Frodo stirs. Sam wakes up. Hey, you! What are you up to? Nothing, said Gollum softly. Notice it's nothing, wicked master. It's nothing, nice master. I dare say, but where have you been to? Sneaking off and sneaking back, you old villain. Gollum withdrew himself. Now, that means, physically, he pulls back. What else does it mean when you withdraw yourself? You go back to your old self. You turn inward. And a green glint flickered under his heavy lids. The glint now is described as green. Jealousy and envy are often described as suffering under the green monster or the green-eyed monster. That's how jealousy and envy are often described. Almost spider-like he looked now. Nice little bit of foreshadowing there by Tolkien. Because now he thinks back up the tunnel where he went. And he's thinking, you're getting what you've got coming to you. The fleeting moment had passed beyond recall. In other words, what Gollum was thinking, gone. Total. What is he saying? Sneaking? Hobbits always so polite. Yeah, so nice hobbits. Smeagol brings them up secret ways nobody else can find. Tired he is, thirsty. Yes, thirsty, and he guides them. He searches for paths, and they say, sneak. This was Gollum's opportunity for redemption. In terms of a choice. If Sam hadn't said, you old villain, where have you been sneaking off to? If Sam had said instead, or Frodo, Gollum, you're one of us. Now we recognize you as a hobbit. We forgive you. Or something like that even. Or Gollum, die in peace. How different would it have been? Instead, he wakes up Frodo, and they go off to chapter 9, and we get Shelob's lair. Gollum ditches them, and they run off. They see the eyes in the one tunnel. They kind of back away from that. They feel the breath of fresh air. They run towards it, and there are these massive ropes blocking it. And then they realize they're not ropes. Spiderweb. What happens to Shelob? Sam stabs her, right? He sees Frodo after Shelob has bitten him. He sees Frodo. He grabs Sting. Shelob comes back. How big is Shelob?
Large.
Because Sam's about 3.5 feet tall. He holds that little sword up because it's only like this long. It'd be more like a dagger in our world, or to humans. He holds that thing up, and Shelob comes and stands above him. So her body's probably, size of these two tables together. Legs 8-10 feet long. She gets up, big sucking Spider-Man. Bigger even than the ones in Australia. She gets above him and she lowers her body down, thinking, I'm just going to squish this little bug. Only thing is, the bug stings. And Sam passes out. Okay. He sees Frodo. What, by the way, is it that does more damage to Shelob than even Sam's little sting? He holds the file, Aelbereth Gilthoniel. Okay? But he goes, when he comes to, page 731, he starts to think, I mean, there's Frodo, bound and seemingly dead. What does Sam not do? Nope, still breathing. He doesn't do that because he looks dead. He's pale. 731. What shall I do? What shall I do? Did I come all this way with him for nothing? And he thinks back to the Mirror of Galadriel. I have something to do before the end. I must see it through, sir, if you understand. He goes, but what can I do? What are the choices Sam has? He's only got two. Louder? Does he ever even think of going home? He never thinks of going home. He thinks of going on, taking the ring, trying to fulfill the quest. Why does he think of doing that? He's the only one left of the fellowship. Why was the fellowship created? To help Frodo complete the quest. What's his other choice? Sit by Frodo and wait till they come. Is the quest going to be achieved that way? No, the ring will be lost. Okay? So he's like, okay, so that's it. I've got to go on. What's he take with him of Frodo's? He has them both already. Frodo lent them to him. He takes Sting and he takes the file of Galadriel. And what does he discover when he goes on? He's not dead. He's mostly dead. If Miracle Max had been there, he could make a nice big pill. And Frodo would come right to. Might not be able to walk, but he'd be better. And what does Sam think about himself? Sam, you idiot. Bottom of 740. You fool. He isn't dead, and your heart knew it. Don't trust your head, Samwise. It's not the best part of you. Samwise, in Old English, it's not a name. It means half-wise. Like, not quite dealing with full deck. Okay? And he hears the orcs take Frodo. They go on up the tunnel. Sam runs after them. Boom! And the doors are slammed shut. Now we have to wait about 11 months to find out what's going to happen if you had gotten the book in 1954. I mean, this is the biggest cliffhanger. Much greater than anything J.K. Rowling does. Okay? And we're going to jump into, will we jump into it? Yeah, we'll start it, and then I'm going to give you the quiz in about 10 or 15 minutes. I'll try to remember. So, we pick up where? At the end of the first half of the Two Towers. The end of the first half of Two Towers, how does it end? What happens? Gandalf, Pippin, Shadowfax, riding the Minas Tirith. And we pick up, Pippin looked out from the shelter of Gandalf's cloak. He wondered if he was awake or still sleeping, etc. Okay? So they're riding on along. Gandalf tells Pippin, do not be afraid. 748, it's kind of interesting. Sleep again and do not be afraid, for you are not going like Frodo to Mordor, but to Minas Tirith, and there you will be as safe as you can be anywhere in these days. If Gondor falls or the ring is taken, Shire will be no refuge. Well, gee, thanks, Gandalf. That's encouraging. Okay. So they make their way to Minas Tirith, and Gandalf warns Pippin, be careful with what you say about, or with what you say to Denethor. He says, he's not a kindly old man like Theoden is. He also says, bottom of 753, don't say anything about Aragorn. Just keep Aragorn quiet, unless you must. Pippin, why not? What's wrong with Strider? Notice, Strider. Gandalf calls him what? Aragorn, his real name. Pippin's like, la-di-da-di-da-di-da, you know. He'll be arriving soon himself anyway, right, Mr. Gandalf? Maybe, but if he comes, it's likely to be in some way that no one expects, not even Denethor. He should come unheralded. And he kind of sits Pippin down and says, okay, now open your eyes and open your ears. There is no time to instruct you now, top of 754, in the history of Gondor, though it might have been better if you'd learned something of it when you were still birds nesting and playing truant in the words of the Shire. Do as I bid is scarcely wise when bringing the news of the death of his heir to a mighty lord. To speak overmuch of the coming of one who will, if he comes, claim the kingship. Kingship? Yes. If you have walked all these days with closed ears and mind asleep, wake up. Pippin doesn't have a freaking clue. So they get there. Denethor welcomes them and says, this isn't the halfling, right? No, it's not him. So they talk. Denethor lets them know he knows Boromir is dead. Bottom of 755. And Pippin says, the mightiest man may be slain by one arrow, and Boromir was pierced by many. When I last saw him, he sank beside a tree and plucked a black feathered shaft from his side. I swooned and was made captive, but I honor his memory, for he was very valiant. And then he says, little service no doubt will so great a lord of men think to find in a hobbit, a halfling from the northern shire. Yet such as it is, I will offer it in payment of my debt. And he pulls out his little sword and he lays it at Denethor's feet. What has he just done? Literally offers him his sword. That is, I'm your man, Hobbit. I now serve you. Denethor has a little smile. Kind of says, this is a blade forged in the north by our own kindred. Pippin tells him where it came from. Gandalf's like, you sure you want to do this? Yes, I am. Take the hilt, he says, and speak after the Lord. And Pippin swears fealty to the Lord of Gondor. To the Lord of Gondor. Not to whom? No. Not to Denethor. He doesn't speak it to the steward of Gondor. He speaks it to the Lord of Gondor. So when Denethor's dead, who's the Lord of Gondor until the king returns? Faramir. And after Faramir, who returns? The return of the king, Aragorn. So even when Pippin goes back on up to the Shire, he's still a fighting man of Gondor. And if Aragorn ever calls for his service, he has to go. Merry will do the same thing with Theoden, we will see. Okay? So, Pippin then tells him everything he can. He tries to shade the truth and hide some things. And we're told, page 757, Gandalf says, I have not ridden hither from Isengard 150 leagues with the speed of wind, only to bring you one small warrior, however courteous. Is it not to you that Theoden has fought a great battle, and that Isengard is overthrown, and that I have broken the staff of Saruman? Denethor, it is much. I mean, way to go, Gandalf. Yeah. I already know enough about these deeds. How? How does he already know? Is there somebody in the background, posting on, Twitter and he's reading their Twitter feed? No. There's something like Twitter, however, at work. We'll find out later. And Pippin looks at the two of them. Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did. More kingly, beautiful, more powerful, and older. But by a sense other than sight, Pippin perceived that Gandalf had the greater power and the deeper wisdom, and a majesty that was veiled. Not only because he's wearing gray. He doesn't all the time go around as Gandalf the White. He covers up the white. Pippin starts to think, how much older is Gandalf than Denethor? And then he starts to wonder, what is Gandalf? In what far time and place did he come into the world, and when would he leave it? And then his musings broke off. And Denethor says, because he and Gandalf were just staring at each other. Game of chicken, as it were. Denethor breaks the game. He loses, in other words. Yes, for though the stones be lost, they say, still the lords of Gondor have keener sight than lesser men. So, Pippin is made essentially a squire. Baragond, who doesn't want to be kind of tasked with him, sends him off to play with his son, Beargill. And we're going to skip a bit. The passing of the Grey Company, we don't have time to get into that right now. So, we will get into that. What is this one for? On Tuesday. In the meantime, let me hand out this quiz. It gives you plenty of time to do it.